Let me paint you a picture of my neighbor, Patricia Hendricks. She's 67 years old, widowed, and has apparently made it her life's mission to ensure that every blade of grass in our neighborhood meets her personal standards of perfection. She's been on the HOA board for 12 years and acts like she personally owns every square inch of the subdivision. Patricia lives in the house directly across from mine, one of those massive McMansions that was clearly built to impress rather than be functional. Perfect manicured lawn, seasonal decorations that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and a driveway so clean you could perform surgery on it. My house, by comparison, is modest. 3 bedrooms, small front yard, and honestly, sometimes the grass gets a little long because I'm working full-time and raising a kid by myself. Sue me. The problem started about 6 months after I moved in. I got my first HOA violation notice for having Tyler's bike on the front lawn overnight. Apparently, this violated Section 4.12 of the community guidelines regarding recreational equipment storage. The fine was $50. I thought it was petty, but whatever. I bought a bike rack for the garage and moved on. Then came the second notice. Tyler had drawn hopscotch squares on our driveway with washable chalk, another $50 fine for unauthorized modifications to common areas. I had to Google whether driveways were considered common areas. They're not. They're private property. But again, I paid the fine and told Tyler to stick to the backyard for chalk art. The third notice was when I realized Patricia wasn't just enforcing rules, she was targeting me specifically. I got cited for having excessive outdoor decorations during Halloween. My decorations? 2 pumpkins on the porch and a skeleton in the front yard. Meanwhile, Patricia's house looked like the set of a horror movie, complete with a full graveyard scene, fog machines, and speakers playing spooky sounds loud enough to wake the dead. When I called the HOA office to complain about the obvious double standard, the property management company told me that Patricia had pre-approved her decorations as seasonal community enhancement, while mine were unapproved personal displays. That's when I realized Patricia wasn't just on the HOA board, she was the HOA board. She'd been bullying other board members into rubber stamping her decisions for years. I started paying closer attention to Patricia's behavior, and what I saw was disturbing. She would walk around the neighborhood every morning with a notebook, literally looking for violations. She had a Ring doorbell and security cameras positioned to not just monitor her property, but to have clear sight lines into her neighbors' yards. She'd positioned her trash cans to partially block the sidewalk in front of my house, forcing Tyler and me to walk around them. When I politely asked her to move them, she told me that trash can placement was first come, first served, and if I didn't like it, I could take it up with the city. The final straw came in March. I had planned a small birthday party for Tyler in our backyard, just a few kids from school, some pizza, and a bounce house rental. I checked the HOA rules. Gatherings of fewer than 25 people on private property didn't require approval. The day of the party, Patricia called the police. She told them there was a loud, disruptive party happening and that she was concerned about unsupervised children in the neighborhood. The cops showed up, took one look at 8 8-year-olds eating cake, and basically told Patricia to stop wasting their time. But Patricia wasn't done. The next week, I got a knock on my door from a Child Protective Services caseworker. Patricia had filed a report claiming that I was neglecting Tyler, that our house was unsafe and unsanitary, and that she had concerns about the child's well-being due to the mother's apparent inability to maintain basic living standards. I'll never forget standing in my doorway, looking at this CPS worker while Tyler hid behind me, all because Patricia was mad about HOA violations. The CPS investigation was humiliating and terrifying. They interviewed Tyler at school, inspected every inch of our house, and spoke to Tyler's teachers and pediatrician. Of course, they found absolutely nothing wrong. Tyler is healthy, happy, well cared for, and our house is perfectly fine. But the damage was done. Tyler had nightmares for weeks about being taken away from me. I had to take time off work for meetings and interviews. I spent $2,000 on a lawyer just to make sure I was protected during the investigation. All because Patricia didn't like that my grass was half an inch too long sometimes. When the CPS case was officially closed with no findings of abuse or neglect, I was relieved but furious. Patricia had weaponized Child Protective Services over HOA disputes. She had traumatized my kid and nearly destroyed my life over petty neighborhood drama. That's when I decided Patricia needed to learn what happens when you mess with someone who knows how to fight back legally.
Here's the thing about being a paralegal. You learn to research everything. I mean, everything. Property records, financial filings, court documents, business registrations. It's basically detective work, but with more paperwork and fewer car chases. After the CPS nightmare, I decided to do a little digging into Patricia Hendricks and her perfect little life. If she wanted to play games with legal agencies, I figured I should know exactly who I was dealing with. I started with the basics. Property records for Patricia's house showed she'd bought it in 2008 for $485,000. Nothing unusual there, except that the mortgage paperwork showed some interesting details about her financial situation. Patricia's house had been purchased with a significant down payment, and the mortgage was in her name only, not jointly with her deceased husband. That suggested she'd either had substantial assets of her own or had refinanced after her husband's death. I dug deeper into the county records and found something curious. Patricia had refinanced her mortgage 3 times in the past 5 years. Each time, she'd pulled out more equity from the house. Her current mortgage balance was actually higher than what she'd originally paid for the property, despite making payments for over a decade. That's usually a sign that someone is having cash flow problems. I checked the state business registration database and found that Patricia was listed as the owner of Hendricks Consulting LLC, a business that claimed to provide administrative and organizational services. The business had been registered for 4 years, but showed minimal activity on its public filings. Then I looked up Patricia's voting records, which are public information in Arizona. Interesting detail. Patricia had been registered to vote at 3 different addresses over the past 2 years. That's unusual for someone who supposedly owns their home. But the real breakthrough came when I searched for Patricia in the county court records database. Patricia Hendricks had been involved in quite a few legal disputes over the past few years. Nothing criminal, but a pattern of civil cases that painted a very interesting picture. She'd been sued by 2 different contractors for non-payment. One case involved $15,000 in landscaping work. The other was $8,000 for interior painting. Both cases had resulted in judgments against Patricia. She'd also sued 3 different neighbors in small claims court over various property disputes. Patricia apparently had a history of escalating minor disagreements into legal battles. Most interesting of all, Patricia was currently involved in a lawsuit with her former HOA property management company. According to the filing, the management company was claiming Patricia had exceeded her authority as a board member and had created hostile conditions that led to multiple residents filing complaints. I requested copies of the court documents for that case, and what I found was fascinating. The management company's filing included sworn statements from other residents describing Patricia's behavior as harassment, intimidation, and abuse of power. One resident claimed Patricia had tried to fine them for having guests park in their own driveway. Another said Patricia had attempted to inspect their backyard without permission, claiming it was part of her HOA duties. A third resident reported that Patricia had threatened to make their life miserable if they didn't vote for her preferred board candidates. The management company was trying to remove Patricia from the board and terminate their contract with our HOA specifically because of her behavior. But here's where it got really interesting. As part of the lawsuit, Patricia's financial records had been subpoenaed, and those financial records, once filed with the court, became public information. What I found in those financial records changed everything. Patricia was broke. Not just tight on cash broke, she was leveraged to the hilt and barely keeping her head above water financially. Her consulting business was generating almost no income. She'd been living off credit cards and home equity loans for years. The multiple refinances weren't for home improvements. They were cash-out refinances to pay off debts. Patricia was 3 months behind on her HOA dues. The woman who was fining everyone else for minor violations hadn't paid her own HOA fees in months. Further investigation found that Patricia's mortgage was in default. The bank had already started foreclosure proceedings, but they were moving slowly because of COVID-related protections that had recently expired. Patricia's perfect life was a facade. She was about to lose her house, had no real income, and was drowning in debt. No wonder she'd been so aggressive about HOA fines. She was probably hoping the revenue would help cover the HOA's expenses and make her look more valuable as a board member. I sat back and smiled. Patricia had made a huge mistake when she called CPS on me, because now I had the ammunition to end her reign of HOA terror permanently. But I wasn't just going to expose her financial problems and call it revenge. No, I had something much more elegant in mind. Once I had Patricia's financial information, I realized I had more than just gossip. I had evidence of potential fraud and misconduct. But I needed to be smart about how I used it. Going nuclear immediately might make me look vindictive, and I didn't want this to blow back on Tyler or me. So I decided to take a systematic approach, the same way I'd handle building a case at work. First, I needed to understand exactly what Patricia had been doing wrong, legally speaking. I requested copies of all HOA board meeting minutes for the past 2 years, which I was entitled to as a homeowner. What I found was a pattern of decisions that benefited Patricia personally while harming other residents. For example, the HOA had hired Patricia's consulting company to handle administrative tasks like violation notices and fine collections. She was literally paying herself to harass the neighbors. The board minutes showed these contracts were approved without competitive bidding and without disclosure that Patricia owned the company. That's a conflict of interest and potentially a breach of fiduciary duty. I also found that Patricia had approved several emergency expenditures from HOA funds without proper board votes. Things like enhanced security monitoring, which conveniently included cameras that had sight lines into specific neighbors' yards, and community enhancement projects that seemed designed to increase her own property value. But the smoking gun was in the financial records. Patricia had been depositing HOA fine payments directly into her personal business account, then transferring money to the HOA's main account in lump sums. She was essentially using HOA funds as her personal slush fund, probably to help manage her cash flow problems. That's embezzlement. I needed more evidence before I could make any accusations, so I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting and do some strategic questioning. The meeting was held in the community center, and only about 12 residents showed up, typical for our neighborhood. Patricia ran the meeting like a dictator, rushing through the agenda and shutting down questions from residents. When we got to the financial report, I raised my hand. I'd like to see a detailed breakdown of the administrative services expenses, I said politely. It seems like we're paying a lot for violation processing. Patricia's face tightened. Those expenses are within budget and have been approved by the board. I understand, but as a homeowner, I'd like to see the actual invoices and contracts. That's my right under the HOA bylaws. The other board members looked uncomfortable. One of them, an older gentleman named Frank, spoke up. "I think that's a reasonable request." Patricia shot him a look that could have melted steel. "We can discuss providing those documents at a future meeting." "Actually," I continued, "the bylaws say financial records should be available for inspection within 48 hours of a written request. I'd like to make that formal request now." I had prepared a written document requesting all financial records, contracts, and invoices for the past 2 years. I handed copies to each board member. Patricia was clearly angry, but she couldn't refuse without violating HOA law. "Fine, you can schedule an appointment to review documents." "Great. I'd also like to know why our HOA is paying for services from Hendricks Consulting LLC. Can you explain what services they provide that couldn't be handled internally?" The room went dead silent. The other board members were looking at Patricia with confusion and concern. Clearly, they hadn't realized she was paying herself with HOA funds. Patricia's composure started to crack. She said that company provides specialized administrative services that are more cost-effective than hiring additional staff. What kind of specialized services? Document processing, violation notices, fine collection, standard property management tasks. Frank cleared his throat. "Patricia, I thought you said that company was owned by someone you'd worked with before. Is there a family connection or something?" The question hung in the air. Patricia's face was getting red, and I could see her calculating whether to lie or come clean. "I may have a business relationship with the owner," she said carefully. "What kind of business relationship?" I pressed. "I am the owner of that company." The room erupted. Other board members were clearly shocked, and the residents in attendance started asking questions about conflict of interest and proper approval processes. Frank looked furious. "Patricia, why wasn't this disclosed when we approved these contracts? This is a serious conflict of interest." "It's not a conflict of interest if the services are competitively priced and properly delivered," Patricia snapped, but she was clearly rattled. I decided to press my advantage. "Speaking of competitive pricing, can you tell us how many bids we received for these services?" Silence. "Was there any competitive bidding process at all?" More silence. "Also, I noticed that according to county records, you've been involved in several lawsuits with contractors and the previous property management company. Shouldn't the board be aware of potential legal liabilities when entering into contracts?" By now, Patricia looked like she was about to have a stroke. "I don't think my personal legal matters are relevant to HOA business. They are if they affect your ability to make sound financial decisions with our money." The meeting basically devolved from there. Other residents started voicing complaints about Patricia's behavior. The other board members were asking questions about oversight and financial controls, and Patricia was getting more defensive and hostile by the minute. Finally, Frank called for an executive session to discuss board governance issues and asked Patricia to step outside. I had accomplished exactly what I wanted. I'd planted seeds of doubt about Patricia's conduct and finances without revealing everything I knew. The other board members were now suspicious and would start asking their own questions. But I wasn't done yet. The next phase of my plan would hit Patricia where it really hurt, her ability to stay in the neighborhood at all.
After the board meeting, things moved quickly. Frank called me the next day to ask if I had any other concerns about Patricia's handling of HOA finances. I told him I had evidence of potential financial irregularities, but wanted to give Patricia a chance to explain herself before making formal accusations. Frank appreciated that approach, but he also told me the board was planning to hire an independent auditor to review all HOA finances and contracts. Patricia had apparently thrown a fit after the meeting, threatening to sue the board for harassment and undermining her authority. That confirmed for me that Patricia was getting desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. The mistake Patricia made was trying to retaliate against me directly. 2 days after the board meeting, I got another HOA violation notice. This time, Patricia was claiming that Tyler's playground set in our backyard was improperly positioned and created a sightline obstruction that violated community standards. Our playground set had been in the same spot for 2 years. There was no sightline issue, and backyard play equipment was explicitly allowed under HOA rules. Patricia was clearly just trying to harass me for challenging her at the meeting. But this time, I was ready. I took photos of the playground set from every angle, documented that it was entirely within our property lines and didn't impact any neighbor's views. I researched the exact HOA regulations and prepared a formal appeal of the violation. More importantly, I used Patricia's obvious retaliation as justification to escalate my research. I filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Financial Institutions regarding Patricia's potential misuse of HOA funds. I also sent a detailed letter to the board of directors outlining all the evidence I'd gathered about Patricia's conflicts of interest, financial irregularities, and pattern of harassment. But the nuclear option was what I did next. I had noticed in Patricia's financial records that she'd been claiming significant business deductions on her taxes for her consulting company. The problem was, her consulting company had been paying itself with HOA funds to provide services to the same HOA Patricia controlled as a board member. That's called a circular transaction, and it can constitute tax fraud if the business deductions aren't legitimate. I compiled a comprehensive file of evidence showing Patricia's financial arrangements and sent it to the IRS whistleblower office. The IRS takes tax fraud seriously, especially when it involves inflated business deductions and potential money laundering. I also realized that Patricia's use of HOA funds to pay her personal business, combined with her position on the board, might constitute wire fraud under federal law. So, I sent the same evidence package to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Finally, I sent copies of everything to the Arizona Attorney General's office, which handles consumer protection and HOA-related fraud. Within a week, Patricia's perfect little world started crumbling. The HOA's independent auditor found exactly what I expected: irregular financial transactions, conflicts of interest, and improper use of community funds. The auditor recommended immediate removal of Patricia from the board and potential criminal referral. The board voted unanimously to terminate Patricia's consulting contract and demand repayment of all funds paid to her company over the past 2 years, approximately $47,000. But that was just the beginning. The IRS sent Patricia a letter informing her that her business tax returns were being audited and that she needed to provide documentation for all business deductions claimed over the past 3 years. The Arizona Attorney General's office opened an investigation into Patricia's conduct as an HOA board member. Most importantly for my purposes, Patricia's mortgage company received copies of the criminal referrals and financial irregularity reports. When a homeowner is under investigation for financial crimes, mortgage companies tend to accelerate foreclosure proceedings. Patricia's house was scheduled for sheriff's sale within 60 days. But I still had one more card to play.
I'd like to say I felt bad watching Patricia's life fall apart, but honestly, after what she put Tyler and me through with that CPS call, I felt nothing but satisfaction. The first sign that Patricia knew she was in serious trouble came when she tried to approach me at the grocery store. I was shopping with Tyler when she appeared at the end of our aisle, looking haggard and desperate. "We need to talk," she said, ignoring Tyler completely. "I don't think that's a good idea, Patricia. You don't understand what you've done. I could lose everything." I looked down at Tyler, who was starting to look scared. "Tyler, why don't you go get us some apples from the produce section? The good ones, like we talked about." After Tyler walked away, I turned back to Patricia. "What I don't understand is why you called CPS on my family over grass length and birthday parties." Silence. For the first time, I saw Patricia's composure finally crack completely. "I'm going to lose my house. The IRS is auditing me. The Attorney General's office is investigating me. I could go to prison." That sounds like consequences for your own actions. Please, I'll resign from the board. I'll leave you alone. Just call off the investigations. I almost laughed. Patricia, I don't control government agencies. Once you file complaints with the IRS or the Attorney General, they make their own decisions about what to investigate. But you started this. I reported potential financial crimes that I discovered through public records. If there weren't any actual crimes, the investigations wouldn't have found anything. Patricia stared at me for a long moment, then said something that confirmed everything I'd suspected about her character. That kid of yours is going to grow up just like you, vindictive and spiteful. I stepped closer to her. Patricia, my son is going to grow up knowing that when someone tries to bully and intimidate his family, there are legal ways to fight back. He's going to know that people who abuse power eventually face consequences. You destroyed my life. No, Patricia, you destroyed your own life when you decided to embezzle from the HOA, harass your neighbors, and call CPS on a child because you didn't like his mother. I just documented it. Patricia walked away without another word. That was the last conversation we ever had. The foreclosure sale happened on schedule. Patricia's house sold for $420,000, which wasn't even enough to cover her outstanding mortgage balance. The IRS audit resulted in Patricia owing an additional $23,000 in taxes and penalties for fraudulent business deductions. The Attorney General's office filed civil charges for HOA financial misconduct, which resulted in another $15,000 in fines and restitution. Patricia was also banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 5 years. The new owners of Patricia's house are a lovely young couple with twin toddlers. They have toys in their front yard, chalk art on their driveway, and the most beautifully imperfect lawn in the neighborhood. The HOA elected a new board that actually follows proper procedures and treats residents like human beings instead of subjects in Patricia's personal kingdom. Frank is the new president, and one of the first things they did was revise the community guidelines to focus on actual safety and property value issues rather than petty aesthetic micromanagement. Tyler hasn't had nightmares about being taken away in months. He's back to drawing chalk art on our driveway and leaving his bike on the front lawn overnight sometimes. Because that's what childhood should be. Messy and imperfect, and free from psychotic neighbors who call government agencies over grass length. As for Patricia, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved back to Ohio to live with her daughter. I hope she learned something from this experience, but honestly, I doubt it. People like Patricia usually just find new victims to torment.